Hello, it's Dr. Maeve here. I'm at the ICM conference in Bali and I'm here with the lovely Jo Cull, who's a UK midwife, and I'm going to talk to her about her research. So if you want to introduce yourself and where you're working.
Thank you very much. So I'm Jo Cull. I'm a National Institute for Health Research Wellbeing of Women doctoral fellow, and my research is around how midwives can support women, or maternity care providers more broadly, can support women that have had difficult experiences before pregnancy. So for example, sexual abuse or violence or birth trauma, the experiences in childhood or adulthood.
That's so interesting. And can you please tell us about the research that you presented today? Because I was so intrigued to see your PPI involvement and how you actually developed the research. From the very beginning, you told us that you had your stakeholders involved from before you even applied for your PhD, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I'm doing critical participatory action research. So the action research part means that I am developing something which I hope will change practice. And critical refers to inclusion of people who are most affected by us having poor services. So it's participatory, obviously including different people. So I've got this research collective, which is a group of women, some of whom have suffered trauma themselves, some of whom are experts in the voluntary sector, and some are midwives. And yeah, they've been involved right from the start, since before I applied for my PhD funding. So is this a problem that I'm looking into? You know, what do I need to do to find out more about it? What am I missing? We met before I put the study funding application in, and from that first meeting of 8, 7 of them are still involved, which is amazing, and extra people have came on board. So it's really been an incredible experience.
Brilliant. So can you describe to me your research so far and what were the findings that you presented today?
Yeah, so I did a systematic review first of all, looking at women's and midwives' experience. So basically, just to give you a really super quick summary of what is going on. So would it be helpful for maternity care providers to ask women about previous experiences that they've had, and what kind of support should they give women if they do disclose previous trauma? And yeah, so that's the kind of fundamental question. So I did a systematic review, and then I did 23 interviews with care providers, experts in the voluntary sector, and women who've suffered trauma themselves. And what I found is that often these conversations take place at the booking appointment, but that's quite a tricky time because there's no relationship, it can be quite an unfamiliar environment to women. There's concerns about, you know, whether confidentiality will be maintained, so trust is a really big thing for women. And these conversations are more difficult for women who don't speak English as a first language, because sometimes they it can be hard to have more complex conversations, or they don't want to share that information with the interpreter that's in the room, or the family member or friend who's interpreting for them. So they're quite complex and sensitive conversations, and they have to be done with great care.
Yeah, it's really important, and you're really advocating. I feel like, from my perspective as a viewer in the audience at your presentation, I felt like you really represented the voices of women very, very, very clearly. And for us as midwives, sometimes it can almost become a tick box exercise, which you don't want it to be, but we're constrained by time, right? We've only got so long in a booking appointment, and you want to give the care, but you were saying about needing additional support sometimes, maybe after the interview, if a woman has disclosed that they might need some additional support.
Yeah, and one of the women I interviewed said that basically she'd had this conversation, you know, about her previous experiences, which were quite extensive in childhood, and she said, like, after that appointment she was just wrecked for 3 days, and she already had a child at home. So I think to raise these issues that women aren't expecting, they don't, they're not forewarned that the conversation is going to take place. They don't know about the limitations of confidentiality. They haven't really thought it through. So sometimes women might disclose things that they kind of later wish they hadn't, or it's not quite the right experience for them, or they don't disclose and then they don't get any help because we assume that people have answered yes to the question if they have, and lots of women will choose not to disclose. Some will just be simple privacy, and some will be a bit more complex than that, but there's definitely needs to be a way for women to get help even if they choose not to talk about it.
And an interesting thing that I took as well from the presentation was the finding that midwives actually found it difficult to deal with the findings as well. What do you do with that information as a midwife when you come home that someone has disclosed all of these traumatic events to you?
And I think that's really underexplored. So one of the studies in my systematic review, an Australian study, did look at the impact on midwives, and it found that, yeah, as you've said, they found it really heavy and hard. And one thing that's hardly been mentioned at all in the literature is what about midwives that have had their own difficult experience. And I'm saying midwives, but actually it is maternity care providers, especially including health visitors afterwards, who often are asking about adverse childhood experiences. So it's more broad than that. But yeah, I think it seems that many care providers themselves have had difficult experiences, and then we're expecting them to deal with other people's trauma without adequate support themselves.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear the results of your research. Can you just summarise your conclusions and recommendations?
Yeah, I've taken the findings from the systematic review and the interviews to develop a set of guidelines for routine discussion of previous trauma in the perinatal period, and they're out for consultation just now. So I hope to have a really clear set of guidelines at the end of the PhD to say this is how routine trauma discussion should be done, so that it's really safe for the woman, like psychologically safe, and also midwives and other maternity care providers have got the support they need.
That is fantastic and well done. I just think you should know that your research is so valuable. You're doing a great job.
Thanks.
So now I'm just going to ask you briefly about your career, because obviously you are a midwife.
Yeah.
And now you're doing research and you're doing your PhD.
Yeah.
You said you're in second year, right? Can you tell us about your journey in midwifery up to this point? Where did you work before this?
Yeah, I was just saying to someone earlier on, which is so cool. I retrained when I was in my 30s. Wow. So it was 10 years in September since I started my training, and I'm presenting at ICM Valley. It's so
you were a
cool.
mature student.
Yeah, I was a chartered accountant before.
Oh my God, this is amazing. Right, because a lot of people who interact with me in social media, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, ask me about having a dream to become a midwife when you're a mature student. It's a very scary thing, a very daunting thing. If you have been in a previous profession, like you were an accountant, to suddenly just be like, yes, I'm going to follow my lifelong dream and I'm going to do midwifery. So what advice do you have, or what was your path?
Like, yes, it is scary, and it can be a bit embarrassing, from having been in a position where you get to wear a suit and everyone treats you well, to I remember really clearly being in a room with this quite kind of posh couple, and I couldn't work out the thermometer. I wanted to take the mom's temperature and I'm just dying, So I think but then humiliation doesn't kill you, does it? It's nice to go back and learn new things. It's lovely, it's wonderful, it's really, really great. So I think if that's something that's in your heart that you want to do, then education's never wasted, ever. It's a wonderful thing to do.
That's brilliant. And so you've actually, you've done a lot really, so in your 10 years.
Yeah, it's been great. So I worked as a midwife for 5 years, and part of that I had a Health Education England and a National Institute for Health Research pre-doctoral clinical academic fellowship, which funded my master's, and now I've got an NIHR Wellbeing of Women doctoral fellowship. So that's been amazing, and those pathways are brilliant for people that are thinking about, would like to do research, they're interested in those things. Yeah.
Brilliant, that's fantastic. I'm really glad I've asked you about that. That's fantastic. Okay, so one last thing before you go. So you've been here for the last 2 days now at the ICM convention, and you have seen the opening ceremony, the plenary sessions today. Do you have any kind of takeaway? What's your best thing that you've learned in the last 2 days? What are you going to take away so far?
Yeah, I think sometimes at the moment there can be a bit of a sense of hopelessness in the NHS, this sense of, we've got so few staff, things are so tight financially. And I loved what Jackie Dunkley-Bent shared this morning. It was one of Kamala Harris's words. Let me read it so that I don't get it wrong. It's not time to throw up our hands, it's time to roll up our sleeves. I really love that.
That is lovely, isn't it?
It's wonderful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's
Thanks,
been lovely
Maeve.
to meet you, Jo, and I will share this with everyone. So enjoy the rest of the conference. See ya.